Well, cuckolds, it's your boy the Hater once again, and it's time for another episode of Hater Outdoors. Let's see how long we can keep this going, because it's gonna get cold real soon, so we may have to switch the Hater indoors once again. But the Hater loves the outdoors. It brings out the hate in him, you know what I mean? And speaking of hate, we need to talk about jobbers that need to be released. Now, very soon, it's time for our annual roster review, you know what I mean? Now, with all that being said, this year's roster review is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be framed as wrestlers who prime Vince McMahon could destroy, right? Because the standards have been lower than before, lower than in the past, lower than ever, you know? And that's what the heart of this video is about. Because before we do the roster review, I must first talk about this, right? In wrestling nowadays, everything is cattywampus, if you will, right? Everything is crooked. Whereas in the past, we had feminine women and masculine men. Now we have masculine women and feminine men. Now we have to adjust for gender, obviously, right? But let's be real. If you had someone like Jade Cargill, Tiffany Stratton, Bianca Belair, if these women were men, they would be a bunch of Brock Lesnars, right? Someone that puts in as much effort as these women do in the gym would be like a Brock Lesnar if they were a male, right? But that's not what we want from our female wrestlers. Well, maybe that's what a bunch of neckbeards want, but I don't think that the majority of us, the casual wrestling fans, want this, right? We want effeminate women and we want masculine men. This is how wrestling always was. Now, in an attempt to circumvent this trope, people have gone the opposite way in both directions. Now, granted, no one's going to sit here and say that, you know, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn are effeminate men. Like, they're not girly, right? They're not like, you know, they're not presented like that. But they are effeminate in other ways. In other words, they're not there for their masculine appeal, right? You can look at the two guys, for example, from Pretty Deadly. These guys are effeminate on purpose, just like Shawn Michaels, right? But the underlying actor that plays the role is not effeminate. Both of these guys, just like HBK, are jacked, right? They look like real dudes. Then they go and play the role of effeminate wrestlers. That is something that I want to differentiate, right? When I talk about effeminate wrestlers, I'm talking about the attitude, the presentation of wrestlers, right? We've got people like Cucky Owens and Sami Zayn coming out week after week and complaining and moaning. Oh, I need to be number one contender. I don't think I'm good enough to be number one contender. What happened to men? All right, we need real men. Now, one of you pointed out that the Hater may be inconsistent because I like Drew McIntyre, which I barely do, especially in these recent weeks where I think Drew McIntyre is basically a buried jobber, but I don't like Karrion Kross as the example that the guy gave. And it got your boy scratching his head a little bit, but only for a second, because the answer speaks for itself. There is a clear difference between Drew McIntyre and Karrion Kross. For one, Drew McIntyre is about 4 inches taller, he's a better looking guy, and he's got a shitload more muscles. Karrion Kross is just a wrestler. Like, if you put Karrion Kross next to prime Bull Buchanan, you would think that Bull Buchanan is a super heavyweight and Karrion Kross is just a wrestler, right? He's just a wrestler. There's nothing special about him. He's not especially big. He's not especially tough looking. In other words, he's not especially anything, right? Drew McIntyre is especially various things. So that's the answer to that, right? But it cannot be denied, for example, that Karrion Kross, by and large, is a masculine wrestler. However, this only goes to prove my point. Maybe if Karrion Kross was pushed, now he's not going to get pushed, as we have established about 100 times on this channel, because he sucks, right? For the reasons that I just stated. However, I've always been consistent, right? And there's no doubt in my mind that if you have to choose, you know what I mean? If you have to choose, I don't know, Karrion Kross or Sami Zayn, you would choose to push Karrion Kross. There's no doubt about that. I don't think anybody would suggest otherwise, right? But the problem is that none of these guys are good enough. In other words, in the Hater Jobber review, they're all going to get fired, right? Now, with respect to the women, I pointed this out in the last SmackDown review, or was it the one the week before, where we had these like basically fat, ugly women just showing up, right? And they're like, one of the underlying principles is that they're attractive, right? Now, I'm not saying they're all pigs, right? They're not complete zeros or anything like that, right? But they're not there for their sex appeal. Even Tiffany Stratton is there for her athleticism. So a lot of people really seem to like her. I don't really get why. She just looks like a bloated up, like Miss Piggy to me. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that even if she was attractive, like Jade Cargill's an attractive woman, but she's not feminine. She's more feminine than the rest of these broads, but she's not feminine, right? Even though she has feminine features, she's built like fucking Brock Lesnar, you know what I mean? She's like a female Brock Lesnar. And that's okay once in a while, right? Because she's supposed to be this like wrestler that stands out. Think about it this way. Chyna, for example, stood out because she was surrounded by like Trish Stratus, Lita, you know, petite and attractive women who were feminine first and foremost, right? Tori Wilson, like all these women who were there because they're good looking. Now, I have to emphasize this, and a lot of people don't understand seemingly, but being good looking in a business like wrestling is a must. As a matter of fact, the only way that someone that's not good looking is ever gonna work out in wrestling is if you focus on anything else, especially on how they're not good looking, right? The idea that the whole point of Stone Cold, like how many times did JR basically say, ain't nothing pretty about Stone Cold? Now I know he was talking about his in-ring style, but the point stands, right? The idea is there's nothing flashy here. He's just awesome. So he gets to be awesome because he's awesome, right? Now you can try to do the same thing for Kevin Owens and CM Punk, but it's not gonna work because they're not awesome. So they need something where you can hang your hat and say, why is this guy even on TV? The basic question, before we even determine whether we like him or not, the first question is, why are you even on my TV? Like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, who I'm focusing on in this video apparently, are two indie guys, right? They're the kind of guys that you go see in the indies and you say, oh, okay, like these guys are good maybe. I mean, I don't think they're even good, but you could say, let's say you like them. You're like, these guys are good, but I see why they're never gonna be in WWE. You know, that's where their careers should have stopped. But because Triple Mark got into Power NXT, he signed these guys, and he basically continued to push them as if this were ROH. Like, keep that in mind. Sami Zayn was never an ROH world champion. Kevin Owens was, I think, but he was like an irrelevant one. You know, like it's like Adam Page was also an ROH world champion, or Adam Cole, whatever, one of them. But it doesn't mean anything. You have to have the total package. And nowadays, everybody essentially is a massive jobber. But it's all predicated and it all centers around the idea that the men are basically not manly enough, right? It's not about, oh, Randy Orton's a good-looking guy. He's a specific type of good-looking guy. Like, Adam Cole is a good-looking guy, but he's not a wrestling good-looking guy, right? So it's not sexual or anything like that. It has nothing to do with their sex appeal. It has to do with them being good-looking in the context of being wrestlers, right? Like, I don't know, for example, I'm a heterosexual, so I don't know if The Rock is a good-looking guy. To be honest, I don't know. But people say he is, right? He's not clearly a good-looking guy to me, you know what I mean? He's not like Randy Orton or like Oro Mensa or these guys that are clearly like, they look like models, right? He's not like that, right? But women seem to like him. That's a part of it too. But you also have to be good-looking in the context of wrestling. Finn Balor is a great example. A lot of women like Finn Balor, but he's not good-looking in the context of a wrestler. He looks, like many people say, like Cookie Rhodes, like an underwear model. And we're not here to determine who's the better underwear model. We're not here to determine if underwear model 1 is better than underwear model 2 who dresses up in paint. We're not here to discover that. We're here to discover who's the best wrestler. And there's something that immediately comes to mind. Number one, the person has to be a badass, right? That's the first and foremost. They have to be a badass and not a tryhard. Karrion Kross, for example, comes off as a tryhard. Like, maybe this guy is a badass in real life, but you can kind of sniff these things out, right? But being a badass is not enough, because Razor is a badass, Akam is a badass, right? Braun Strowman is a badass, but they don't have the look. They're not, quote unquote, good looking enough. Meaning that they fit one type of the equation, but not the other type. Versus, let's just say, for example, Randy Orton, right? Randy Orton looks like a badass, right? And he's also good looking. And it's not a surprise that Randy Orton is higher up on the card. Now, people can go on and on about how great he is in the ring, but let's be real. Randy Orton does 3 or 4 moves. People keep saying he does everything so fluidly. Yeah, he does mostly headlocks, then he does a good RKO, and that's pretty much his moveset. He does the vintage Orton DDT, which like 95% of the wrestlers can easily do without botching, right? That's not why he's on top. He's on top because he's marketable. He's marketable to men who are attracted to him being a badass, and they think to themselves, wow, Randy Orton's so cool. And he's marketable to women who think he's an attractive guy. You see what I'm getting at? Same thing with women, right? With women, you need a woman who is attractive, right? She's attractive, so this markets to the male demographic, right? And then you need a woman who is tough, but reasonably so, which attracts the women's demographic, right? I don't understand how and why the standards have been flipped, right? The same people that say like Vince McMahon is only into big sweaty muscle guys, or they might say the hater is only into big sweaty muscle guys, they're into big sweaty muscle women, right? Why doesn't the same standard apply? The correct answer is because the standards for genders are different. And that all comes down to economics. An attractive feminine woman is gonna draw more than a bulky and masculine woman, and vice versa. Think about it this way. I'll give you a great example. Adrian Brody is an excellent actor. Adrian Brody will never be the box office star that Jean-Claude Van Damme was, right? It's not possible. Because men look at him and say, he's a normal guy, right? Same thing, motherfucks. Same thing with women. You know, every actress that is a bankable star is a very attractive woman, right? I'll give you a great example. Viola Davis is an excellent actress. She's never gonna be a bankable star the same way that, I don't know, Halle Berry is gonna be, right? It's just not gonna happen, right? Think about what I'm saying to you. There's certain things that have been proven, and you can see this in every different sphere, right? A very, very hyper-masculine man, like let's say Arnold Schwarzenegger, is gonna draw millions of dollars at the box office. Likewise, if you take like Gisele Bündchen, right? She's a model, she gets paid more than every male model combined, basically. Why? Because she's a woman and she's relatively effeminate, right? She's a woman, so she gets paid for being a woman, and a man gets paid for being a man. Now, people almost demand the opposite, right? And it's not because they think it's better. They demand it because it's the opposite. They basically say, well, like, Vince kept pushing big muscle guys, so now we want these normal, regular-ass dudes, right? Which are not feasible, like, as champions, but are feasible as the viewer, right? A lot of viewers look like Kevin Owens, and a lot of viewers look like Sami Zayn. But the same standard isn't applied to the women, right? It's applied only to their beauty, right? So it's like, oh, not every woman is as attractive as Trish Stratus. Yeah, we know. Some are as attractive as Bianca Belair or Tiffany Stratton. But very few women, arguably even fewer, are as jacked as these women, right? So for some reason, having hyper strong standards for women is considered a positive, and having lower standards for men is also considered a positive. You would think that if Vince McMahon, quote unquote, got it wrong, that it would be the opposite, right? That we should try to either push both strong men and strong women. Every woman should look like Bull Nakano in her prime, or Awesome Kong, and every man should look like Batista and Brock Lesnar. But that's not what we're seeing, or vice versa. Every man should be Adam Cole, and every woman should be like Lita and Trish Stratus. But we don't see that either, right? Do you see what I'm getting at here? There is an obvious direction of marketability. Feminine women, masculine men. Now we get masculine women and feminine men. And people are like, why is no one watching? Why is the viewership at like 1.7 million? Gee, stupid, I don't know. Maybe because what they're showing you is not attractive to the casual audience. And people forget. They get enamored by the money, which would be there anyways. If WWE kept its business model, but also had 7 million views, they would be making like 5 times the money they're making. Because a lot of the business model just basically relates one way or another to views. They've just found other ways to monetize their product, right? Mostly through like a commercial every 30 seconds, and then commercials within the show, and then commercials within commercials. You see what I'm saying? That's all that's happened. Sponsorships and things like that. That's all that's happened. They're making the money because it's more profitable now to have like a deal with Netflix to make money on YouTube and all these other things that just didn't exist before. That's all it is. They would still make that money, but they would make more because more people will be watching if they follow the simple segment. And I get it. Social pressures are such that people don't want this anymore, that people don't care about this anymore. And, it is what it is. You can think about it any way you want, but the facts are the facts. You know that when you turn on the TV and you see Bianca Belair and Sami Zayn, you're like, she's worse than the divas from back in the day, and Sami Zayn is worse than the male performers of the past, right? There's not one person that's better than their analog, right? There's not one person, you know what I mean? Like, are people gonna say, how everyone says when there's like a Hispanic star on the rise, quote unquote, that they remind them of Eddie Guerrero? Do you think anybody's gonna say in 15 years, wow, this guy reminds me of a young Humberto Carrillo? Nobody's gonna say that because nobody cares about Humberto Carrillo, right? Nobody cares. Everybody else is generic, right? But they might say it about the women. They might say, this reminds me of a young Bianca Belair, because Bianca Belair, for better or for worse, is otherworldly. She is exemplary. But the problem is, she's exemplary in the way that a man should be exemplary, right? And that brings up another problem, right? In order for women to main event WrestleMania, they have to be like men. This is not respecting women's wrestling. This is taking women's wrestling, turning it into men's wrestling with women, and then presenting it as the main event. The next step is having just men in like bra and panties matches. That's where we're headed. But don't be surprised when the ratings keep going down, cucks.